What kind of person smashes a car over a $50 fine? That's the question I asked myself when I stepped out of my house on a crisp October morning and saw my sedan, my pride and joy, defaced with red spray paint screaming deadbeat across the hood. I'm Marcus Kane, a federal agent with the ATF, trained to stay calm under pressure, but this was personal. The culprits didn't even try to hide. Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, stood across the street, arms crossed, smirking like she'd just won a war. Her two lackeys, clipboard-wielding busybodies, flanked her, nodding like obedient drones. My quiet Virginia suburb, Oak Ridge Estates, was supposed to be a haven after years of chasing gun runners and busting illegal arms deals. Instead, it was ground zero for a petty tyrant's reign. I moved here 6 months ago, wanting a low-key life. A place to grill steaks, mow the lawn, maybe even start a family someday. Oak Ridge seemed perfect, manicured lawns, friendly waves, kids on bikes. But Karen Mitchell ruled it like a fiefdom. Her HOA notices were infamous. Fines for grass half an inch too tall, warnings for unapproved mailbox colors, even citations for excessive holiday lights. I'd paid my dues on time, every time, but last month, a $50 special assessment appeared for community beautification. No vote, no explanation, just a demand. I ignored it, figuring it was a scam. Big mistake. That morning, as I stared at my ruined car, Karen strutted over, her heels clicking like gunfire on the pavement. "You should have paid, Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "This is what happens when you disrespect the rules." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. I faced down cartel enforcers without blinking, but this woman's audacity lit a fire in me. I wanted to tear into her, to demand answers, but I knew better. Evidence first, confrontation later. I pulled out my phone, snapped photos of the damage, and noted the paint can still dangling from her lackey's hand. Karen's smirk faltered when she saw my badge peeking from my jacket. "You don't scare me," she snapped, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't used to pushback. I spent the day piecing it together. Neighbors whispered about Karen's tactics, intimidation, selective fines, even rumors of her pocketing HOA funds. Nobody dared challenge her. She'd run the board unopposed for years, her husband a lawyer who backed her every move. But I wasn't just another homeowner. I spent my career dismantling systems built on fear and lies. By evening, I'd filed a police report and called my buddy at the local precinct, who confirmed Karen had a history of complaints, none pursued, thanks to her connections. I wasn't deterred. I dug into the HOA's financials, public records anyone could access. What I found wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was a trail of missing money, thousands unaccounted for. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a thief. The next morning, I knocked on her door, calm as ever, and handed her a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. "You're in violation of Article 7, Section 3, I said, citing the rule against property damage. Her face reddened, but she laughed it off. "You think you can intimidate me? This is my neighborhood." I didn't flinch. "We'll see about that." I walked away, already planning my next move. Karen thought she'd won round one, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I wasn't just fighting for my car. I was fighting for every neighbor she'd bullied, every dollar she'd stolen. This wasn't over. The neighborhood buzzed with tension, like a storm brewing before the first lightning strike. I spent the next few days gathering intel, moving quietly. My job had taught me patience, stakeouts, wiretaps, months of watching criminals think they're untouchable. Karen was no different. She thrived on control, but every tyrant has a weak spot. Mine was the truth, and I was determined to drag it into the light. I started with the neighbors. Most were too scared to talk, their voices hushed, eyes darting toward Karen's pristine colonial at the end of the cul-de-sac. But a few cracked under gentle pressure. Mrs. Ellison, a retired teacher, admitted Karen had fined her $200 for a non-compliant birdhouse. Mr. Patel, a single dad, said she'd threatened to lien his house over a late payment he swore he'd never owed. I cross-referenced their stories with the HOA's public filings. The numbers didn't add up. Over $10,000 in miscellaneous expenses over 2 years, with no receipts. I wasn't an accountant, but I knew a paper trail when I saw one, or the lack of it. I reached out to a contact at the IRS, asking for a favor. If Karen was skimming, there'd be traces, unreported income, shady deductions. Meanwhile, I kept my routine normal: work, gym, home, knowing Karen was watching. She'd sent another notice, this one for unauthorized vehicle repairs, because I'd parked my damaged car in my driveway. Classic power play. I ignored it, but I didn't ignore her. Then came the twist. Late one night, I got a call from an unknown number. A shaky voice whispered, "Check the community center's storage closet. You'll find what you need." The line went dead. My gut screamed trap, but curiosity won. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the community center, a squat building Karen treated as her personal palace. The closet was locked, but a cheap padlock was no match for my lockpick set. Inside, I found a cardboard box stuffed with envelopes, cash payments, labeled with names and dates. No bank deposits, no records. Just cold, hard proof of Karen's side hustle. My heart raced. This wasn't just petty theft, it was organized. I photographed everything, careful not to disturb the evidence. As I slipped out, a shadow moved in the parking lot. One of Karen's lackeys, a wiry guy named Todd, stood there, phone in hand. "You're in over your head, Kane," he called, his voice smug but nervous. I didn't respond, just walked past him, my mind racing. How did he know I was there? Either Karen had eyes everywhere, or the caller had set me up. Either way, the game had just gotten dirtier. I spent the night uploading the photos to a secure server, knowing I'd need backup if this went south. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a predator, and I was closing in. The confrontation was inevitable, like a fuse burning toward dynamite. I didn't want a public spectacle, but Karen forced my hand. The next HOA meeting was scheduled at the community center, a sterile room packed with folding chairs and nervous homeowners. Karen stood at the front, gavel in hand, her smile as sharp as a blade. I'd spent the week preparing, consulting a lawyer friend about HOA law, and emailing my IRS contact for updates. The cash in that closet was a gold mine, but I needed more to nail her. Bank records, witnesses, something undeniable. Tonight, I'd start with a warning shot. I walked in late, badge clipped to my belt, and took a seat in the back. Karen's eyes locked on me, her composure slipping for a split second. She droned on about landscaping budgets, but the room's tension was palpable. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood. "I'd like to discuss the $10,000 in unaccounted funds from the last 2 years, I said, my voice steady. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's gavel froze midair. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Kane," she said, her tone icy. "Do you have proof?" I held up a folder. Copies of the financial discrepancies, nothing about the closet yet. "I'm happy to share this with the board. Or the authorities." The room erupted. Neighbors whispered, some nodding, others shrinking in their seats. Karen's husband, Greg, a slick lawyer in a tailored suit, stood up. "This is slander," he barked. "You're out of line." I didn't back down. "Then explain the missing money, Greg. Or the fines you've been strong-arming people into paying." The crowd grew louder, emboldened. Mrs. Ellison stood, her voice trembling but firm. "He's right. I paid $200 for a birdhouse I built with my grandkids. It's not fair." Others chimed in, their fear giving way to anger. Karen slammed her gavel, shouting for order, but the tide was turning. That's when Todd, her lackey, made a mistake. He lunged from the side, grabbing for my folder. Instinct kicked in. I sidestepped, pinning his arm behind him in one fluid motion. "Don't," I said low and calm. The room went silent. Karen's face was a mask of fury, but she knew she'd lost control. I released Todd, who scurried back, and left the meeting with the folder intact. Outside, Mrs. Ellison caught up with me. "That was me on the phone," she whispered. "I'm tired of being scared." I nodded, grateful but wary. The fight was far from over, and Karen wasn't going down without a war. Karen didn't wait long to retaliate. 2 days after the meeting, I woke to a tow truck in my driveway. My car, still awaiting repairs, was being hooked up. The driver, a nervous kid, showed me a work order signed by Karen, claiming my vandalized vehicle violated HOA aesthetics. I flashed my badge and sent him packing, but the message was clear: Karen was escalating. I called my precinct contact, who confirmed the tow company was legit, but had been misled. Karen was playing dirty, using every tool at her disposal. I needed to move faster. My IRS contact came through that afternoon. Karen's personal accounts showed deposits matching the cash I'd found, small enough to avoid suspicion, but consistent. I also learned Greg had been funneling HOA funds into a shell company for consulting fees. It was fraud, plain and simple. Armed with this, I rallied the neighbors. Mrs. Ellison hosted a secret meeting at her house, where a dozen of us planned to demand an emergency HOA election. Karen's bylaws allowed it if enough homeowners petitioned, and we had the signatures. But I knew she'd fight tooth and nail. The next blow came unexpectedly. My supervisor at the ATF called, her voice tight. An anonymous tip had accused me of abusing my authority, claiming I'd used my badge to intimidate neighbors. I knew the source instantly, Karen or Greg, trying to discredit me. I explained the situation, and my supervisor, who'd seen me take down worse than HOA tyrants, backed me. Still, the accusation stung. It was a reminder of how far Karen would go. I spent the evening combing through her social media, finding posts where she bragged about cleaning up Oak Ridge. Each one was a taunt, fuel for my resolve. By now, the neighborhood was a powder keg. Karen's allies patrolled the streets, handing out new fines like candy. But the tide was shifting. Mr. Patel organized a group to distribute flyers exposing the financial discrepancies. Kids started chalking Karen must go on sidewalks. I kept my distance, knowing my role as a federal agent meant I had to stay clean. But every night, I reviewed the evidence, building an airtight case. Karen thought she could outlast me, but she didn't know the storm coming her way. The emergency HOA meeting was set for Saturday, and the community center was packed. Karen had tried to cancel it, citing procedural errors, but the petition held. I arrived early, my folder now thick with evidence. Bank records, the closet photos, witness statements. Neighbors filled the seats, their faces a mix of hope and fear. Karen stood at the podium, her usual confidence fraying. Greg sat beside her, whispering furiously. I took a seat near the front, my badge hidden, but my resolve on full display. Mrs. Ellison spoke first, presenting the petition for a new election. Karen interrupted, claiming the signatures were forged. That's when I stood, holding up my folder. Before we vote, let's talk about the $12,000 in undocumented cash payments, I said, projecting my voice. I passed out copies of the bank records, watching Karen's face pale. Greg tried to object, but the crowd drowned him out, demanding answers. I laid out the evidence, the closet, the shell company, the pattern of intimidation. Neighbors gasped, some crying, others shouting. Karen's empire was crumbling. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. Todd, her loyal lackey, stood up, his hands shaking. It's true, he stammered. She made me collect the cash, told me to keep quiet or I'd lose my house. The room exploded. Karen lunged at him, screaming traitor, but Greg pulled her back. Todd kept talking, spilling everything. How Karen had targeted vulnerable neighbors, how she'd used the money for personal trips. I hadn't expected this, but it was the nail in her coffin. I handed the floor to Mrs. Ellison, who called for the vote. Karen's board was ousted in a landslide. But Karen wasn't done. As the meeting ended, she stormed toward me, her face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, she hissed, close enough for me to smell her perfume. I met her gaze, unflinching. Take it up with the IRS, I said. She froze, then turned and fled, Greg trailing behind. The neighbors cheered, but I knew this wasn't the end. Karen's kind never goes quietly. The fallout was swift and brutal. By Monday, the IRS had opened an investigation into Karen and Greg's finances, thanks to my tip and Todd's testimony. The local police, finally free of Greg's influence, issued a warrant for Karen's arrest on vandalism charges tied to my car. Neighbors reported seeing her pack bags, but she didn't get far. Federal agents, my colleagues, picked her up at a motel an hour away. Greg tried to lawyer up, but the evidence was overwhelming. The shell company collapsed under scrutiny, revealing a web of fraud that reached beyond Oak Ridge. The neighborhood began to heal, but scars remained. Mrs. Ellison took over as interim HOA president, promising transparency. Mr. Patel led a committee to refund unfair fines. I helped where I could, but my role as a federal agent meant I had to step back. The spotlight wasn't my place. Still, neighbors stopped by with thank yous, homemade pies, handwritten notes, even a new birdhouse from Mrs. Ellison's grandkids. My car was repaired, the red paint a fading memory, but the lesson lingered. Power unchecked breeds corruption, and it takes courage to fight back. Karen's downfall wasn't just about money or fines. It was about a community reclaiming its voice. For years, she'd ruled through fear, convincing people their homes, their lives, weren't truly theirs. I'd seen that tactic before. Cartels, gangs, tyrants all use it. But Oak Ridge proved stronger. The kids' chalk messages faded with the rain, but the spirit behind them didn't. I started sleeping better, knowing I'd played a part, however small, in giving my neighbors their freedom back. Yet I couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Karen's final threat, those hissed words about regret, stuck with me. I'd made enemies before, but this felt different. Personal. I kept my eyes open, my instincts sharp. The fight might have been over, but the war wasn't. Months later, Oak Ridge was a different place. The HOA meetings were lively, not tense. Neighbors debated flower beds and block parties, not fines. Mrs. Ellison's leadership was a breath of fresh air. She listened, laughed, even brought cookies. My car sat shiny in the driveway, and I'd started grilling again, inviting Mr. Patel and his kids over for burgers. Life felt normal, but I'd learned normal is fragile. I kept tabs on Karen's case. She'd pleaded guilty to lesser charges, avoiding jail, but facing hefty fines and community service. Greg wasn't so lucky. His law license was under review, and the IRS was circling. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was enough. One evening, as I mowed my lawn, a kid rode by on a bike, waving. "Thanks for standing up, Mr. Kane," he shouted. I waved back, a lump in my throat. This was why I'd fought. Not for my car, not for revenge, but for moments like this. A neighborhood where kids could ride free, where people weren't afraid to speak. I'd spent years enforcing the law, chasing big fish, but this small victory hit harder. It reminded me that power doesn't come from a badge or a gavel. It comes from standing up, even when it's easier to stay quiet. As the sun set, I leaned against my porch, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. Oak Ridge wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. Karen's reign was a memory, a cautionary tale. I'd go back to my job, my life, but I'd carry this with me. A reminder that no tyrant, no matter how small, is untouchable. And as long as there are people willing to fight, there's hope. Always hope.